The small, seemingly forgotten village of Altenwald rested quietly in the heart of a deep, narrow valley, embraced by forests so thick and ancient that their towering pine trees seemed to scrape the very sky itself, their dark green needles forming a dense canopy that filtered the cold, pale sunlight into soft, dappled patterns on the snowy ground below. The village's houses, built of rough-hewn timber and stone, huddled together beneath steep roofs heavy with the weight of many winters, their chimneys curling thin trails of smoke into the crisp morning air. For generations, Altenwald had lived in harmony with the slow and unchanging rhythm of rural life, where the sound of creaking wooden carts slowly crossing frost-hardened dirt roads, the comforting crackle and warmth of wood fires burning in humble hearths, and the distant, melancholy calls of hunters setting out into the mist-laden forests at daybreak were the only disturbances to the quiet solitude of the valley. For countless years, the village had been spared the worst ravages of war and turmoil, shielded by its remote location and the indifferent arms of nature. But as the cruel months of 1944 unfolded and autumn reluctantly gave way to the bitter cold of early winter, an ominous and restless shadow began to creep across the land. It spread slowly but inevitably like a gathering storm on the horizon, a harbinger of destruction and despair that sent ripples of fear and unease through every household in Altenwald. The villagers whispered to one another in low tones, speaking of strange sounds in the distance, distant thunder not caused by the weather, the low growl of engines far away, and the scent of smoke that sometimes drifted faintly on the wind, hinting at fires burning beyond the forest's edge. Word of an approaching force had begun to spread, rumors carried from town to town by traveling merchants, soldiers on furlough, and frightened refugees. This was no ordinary enemy, this was a relentless, overwhelming machine of war, a vast armored column, a dark wave of steel and fire commanded by the enemy's most ruthless division, a force known and feared by all who had heard its name. They were not mere men wielding rifles and marching in formation, but massive, mechanical beasts, towering steel monsters equipped with cannons capable of leveling entire villages with terrifying efficiency, and tracks so heavy they crushed the earth beneath them as though it were mere paper. The people of Altenwald could only watch and wait with growing dread as these monstrous machines drew ever closer, their advance felt in the trembling of the ground and the tightening of the air with tension. A thick, gnawing fear settled deep in their hearts, a fear that whispered that everything they had known, everything they loved, could be wiped away in an instant. Amid the villagers was a young man named Anders Vogel, barely 20 years old but already marked by the harsh hand of fate. He stood tall and lean, with eyes sharp and restless, flickering with both curiosity and the burden of an unspoken sorrow, the sorrow of a father lost to the chaos of war years ago, a man he had never met but whose memory haunted every corner of his mind like a half-remembered dream. The stories of his father's bravery and sacrifice had been passed down in hushed voices at the kitchen table, filling Anders with a complicated mix of pride, longing, and an unshakable sense of duty. As the shadow of the enemy's advance darkened the horizon, that same duty became a flame burning fiercely inside him, a call to stand and fight, to protect the fragile remnants of home and family from being swept away by the relentless tide of war. With this resolve hardening in his heart, Anders made the difficult choice to join the local resistance, a scattered but determined group made up of farmers, hunters, and soldiers who had been thrown back into the fight by circumstance. Though they lacked the weapons, the training, and the numbers to face the enemy head-on, they possessed something far more precious, the indomitable will to resist, to survive, and to reclaim their land from the jaws of destruction. In the heart of Altenwald, beneath the heavy stones of an old cellar that had long served as a refuge from storms and danger, Captain Wilhelm Becker stood over a rough-hewn wooden table. The dim glow of flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows on the damp, cracked walls, illuminating the deep furrows and weathered scars etched into his face, each line a testament to years of hardship, loss, and unrelenting conflict. Becker was a man forged in the crucible of war, his once youthful features hardened into the stern visage of a seasoned veteran who had stared into the abyss more times than he could count and returned, though forever changed. His eyes, sharp and piercing beneath heavy brows, held the quiet weight of experience and the burden of countless difficult decisions. Around the table, the resistance fighters had gathered, a motley assembly of worn farmers, hunters with steady hands, and a handful of former soldiers whose uniforms had long since been traded for whatever clothes they could scavenge. Their faces were pale and drawn, marked by sleepless nights and gnawing uncertainty, yet beneath their exhaustion glimmered the faint sparks of determination. The air in the cramped cellar was thick with anticipation and the musky scent of damp earth and candle wax. Spread before them lay a battered map, its creases worn soft by years of folding and unfolding, bearing the marks of many hands. The intricate details of the surrounding terrain were laid bare, thick forests that could hide both friend and foe, rolling hills that offered vantage points, winding dirt roads that wound through the valleys, and scattered villages like Altenwald itself. Becker's fingers traced the jagged lines of the enemy's expected route, marked boldly in red, while the resistance's hidden positions were circled in blue, each carefully chosen to exploit natural features and maximize the chance of success against a far superior force. "We cannot defeat them by direct confrontation," Becker said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of urgency that cut through the quiet. "Their tanks are too many, their firepower far too great. To stand against them in open battle would be to invite annihilation." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the faces around him. "But we have one advantage they do not possess, the intimate knowledge of this land, the ability to move unseen through shadows, and above all, the power of surprise." Lowering his voice until it became little more than a breath, Becker leaned closer over the map, revealing a secret tactic long buried in the annals of military history, a forbidden, firing pattern whispered about in hushed tones by old soldiers and scholars but condemned and forgotten because of its inherent danger and complexity. It was a desperate gamble, a technique requiring absolute precision, coordination, and nerves of steel, but it might just be the slender thread of hope they needed. He traced a series of staggered and layered movements across the map, outlining a plan that combined guile and ruthlessness, strategically planted mines concealed beneath the fragile crust of snow, small arms fire delivered with deadly accuracy from concealed nests hidden among the trees, coordinated Molotov cocktail strikes aimed with precision at vulnerable engine compartments and fuel tanks, and a careful funneling of the enemy's armored column into tight kill zones, narrow orchards, ruined villages, and craggy ravines where their overwhelming size and power could be turned against them. "We will not attack them head-on," Becker said firmly, his eyes burning with conviction. "Instead, we will make them walk into a trap of fire and steel, confusion and chaos. If we succeed, our enemies will remember this day long after the guns fall silent. We will create a silent echo that will haunt their dreams and cripple their will to fight." He straightened, his face hardening with resolve as he looked each man and woman in the eye. "This plan will demand everything from us: perfect timing, courage beyond fear, and above all, unbreakable discipline. There will be no room for mistakes. But if we succeed, we will prove that even the smallest flame can burn through the darkest night." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of Becker's words sinking deep into the hearts of all who heard them. Then, slowly, nods began to ripple through the group, a quiet but resolute promise that they were ready to face whatever horrors awaited, united by a common cause and the hope that they might turn the tide against the monstrous tide rolling toward their homes. The days that followed were a blur of tireless labor, whispered plans, and relentless preparation, as the ragged band of resistance fighters poured every ounce of their dwindling energy and scarce resources into setting the stage for their desperate gambit. From dawn to dusk, and often long into the shivering, silent hours of night, Anders Vogel and his comrades moved like shadows through the frostbitten landscape, their breath visible in the icy air as they scoured the dense forests and abandoned farmsteads scattered around Altenwald for anything that might aid their cause. Every fragment of explosives, every bullet, every drop of flammable liquid became a precious lifeline in the coming battle. The orchard at the edge of the village, once a place of quiet beauty, where gnarled apple trees had stood for decades, their branches heavy with fruit in the summer and skeletal and bare beneath the winter snow, was transformed piece by painstaking piece into a lethal maze. Beneath the delicate white blanket of snow, the men and women of the resistance stretched taut tripwires, each one carefully concealed beneath fallen leaves and icy twigs, designed to trigger the hidden mines that lay just beneath the frozen earth. Barrels filled with thick, oily liquid were carefully buried behind tree trunks and hidden in shallow ditches, their surfaces coated in a thin film of frost, ready to burst into flames at the first spark. Every rock, every fallen branch, every nook and cranny became a potential death trap. The work was grueling, and the cold bit mercilessly at their fingers and faces, but no one dared pause for long. Each movement was deliberate, careful, precise, the difference between life and death often depending on a single misplaced footstep or a moment's hesitation. Anders found himself working alongside Greta, a young woman whose fierce spirit and unwavering resolve had earned the respect of everyone around her. Greta's eyes were sharp and unyielding, and beneath her calm exterior beat a heart scorched by grief. The loss of her brother to the enemy's steel beasts had hardened her into a warrior willing to fight for every inch of ground. In the rare moments when the biting wind allowed them brief respite beside a flickering campfire, Anders and Greta shared fragments of their lives in quiet conversation, stories of families torn apart, dreams shattered by the war, and the fragile hope that somewhere beyond the smoke and blood there might still be a future worth fighting for. It was in these stolen moments, surrounded by the cold and the dark, that Anders found a flicker of warmth and courage he hadn't known he possessed. One night, as the pale flames danced and cast flickering shadows on the rough stone walls of their hideout, Anders's voice broke the silence. "Do you really think we'll make it out alive?" he asked softly, the words heavy with the weight of uncertainty and fear. Greta looked up from the dying embers, her gaze steady and fierce. "I don't know," she replied honestly, her voice unwavering despite the chill in the air. "But if we don't try, if we give up without a fight, then we're already dead." Her words settled into Anders's heart like a solemn vow, a call to courage, and a promise that they would face whatever came together. Every day, the tension grew thicker, the sound of distant engines echoing through the valley like a gathering storm. The men and women of Altenwald knew that soon, very soon, the enemy's monstrous column would be upon them, and when it came, there would be no turning back. The morning that the enemy finally arrived was colder than any day the villagers of Altenwald had known in recent memory, a biting chill that cut through even the thickest layers of clothing and turned breath into clouds of mist that hung frozen in the still air. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, heavy with the promise of snow, and the trees stood motionless, like silent sentinels bracing themselves for the violence that was about to descend. The scent of frost mixed with something unfamiliar and foreboding, the acrid tang of oil and burning rubber, carried faintly on the sharp wind. From the shadowed edge of the dense forest came a low, menacing rumble that grew steadily louder with every passing second, vibrating through the frozen earth beneath the villagers' feet and setting their nerves on edge. It was a sound unlike any other, deep and mechanical, a metallic growl that seemed to shake the very bones of the land. Through the skeletal branches of the trees, the first dark shapes of the enemy's armored column began to emerge, moving inexorably forward with a terrifying purpose and relentless efficiency. The tanks rolled like a tide of black steel, cutting a destructive path through the frost-covered fields and snow-dusted underbrush. Their heavy treads ground the frozen earth into churned-up mud and deep, jagged scars, tearing through the landscape with brutal power. Towering above the men who marched and followed behind them, their enormous turrets swiveled slowly, methodically scanning the terrain with cold, unfeeling precision, as if seeking out every hidden shadow, every potential threat that might challenge their overwhelming dominance. The sheer size and weight of these monstrous machines dwarfed the fragile ruins of barns, stone fences, and leafless trees, turning the once peaceful orchard into a potential battlefield of fire and steel. Anders's heart pounded wildly in his chest as he crouched low behind a fallen tree trunk, sweat mixing with frost on his brow. The scale of the enemy force was staggering, an endless procession of blackened metal giants, each one bristling with deadly weapons, armored thick enough to shrug off rifle fire as though it were the buzz of a passing insect. The cold, relentless gaze of the lead tank's turret swept slowly over the orchard, its armored eye searching for any sign of resistance, any spark of defiance that might still be hiding in the shadows. Then, with a sudden, barely perceptible motion, Captain Becker raised his arm and gave the signal, a sharp, brief whistle that barely pierced the roar of engines and the clattering of metal. It was the cue the resistance had been waiting for, a silent command to spring their trap and strike at the enemy's most vulnerable points. The tension among the resistance fighters was palpable, the seconds stretching out like hours as they braced themselves for the explosion of violence that would shatter the fragile calm. Every muscle tensed, every breath held tight as the first spark of the battle ignited, setting in motion a deadly chain of events that would decide the fate of Altenwald, and the lives of everyone who called it home. In an instant, the fragile silence that had held the village in its breath was shattered by a thunderous explosion that ripped through the cold morning air like a violent storm breaking loose. The first mine, carefully concealed beneath the frozen earth and hidden by a deceptive layer of snow, detonated with devastating force directly beneath the lead tank's enormous tread. The explosion sent a shockwave through the orchard, hurling shards of ice, splintered wood, and twisted metal high into the air, and threw the monstrous machine violently off balance, causing it to lurch sideways in a terrifying display of vulnerability. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the force of the blast, shaking the ground where Anders and the resistance fighters crouched in tense anticipation. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks as the column ground to a sudden halt, the thunder of engines replaced by an uneasy silence punctuated only by the distant crackle of burning fuel and the sharp, panicked shouts of soldiers scrambling to assess the damage. Their imposing machines, symbols of invincibility, were suddenly exposed, their overwhelming power momentarily undone by the cunning and courage of the resistance. From their carefully chosen and expertly concealed positions among the twisted trunks of the apple trees and the tangled underbrush, the resistance fighters opened fire with precision and determination. The sharp, rhythmic crack of rifles and the muted reports of pistols echoed through the orchard, cutting through the smoke and dust like a deadly chorus. Bullets pinged and ricocheted against the cold, impenetrable steel of the tanks, many harmlessly deflecting off their armored surfaces, but some finding the small, vulnerable gaps, vision slits, engine grates, and fuel tanks, that could bring the beasts to a grinding halt. Molotov cocktails, thrown with practiced accuracy, sailed through the smoky air and burst in vivid explosions of orange and red flames against the steel hulls, their sticky liquid quickly igniting and spreading fire across vulnerable exhaust vents and open engine compartments. Black smoke curled upward in thick plumes, choking the air and turning the battlefield into a scene of chaotic fire and destruction. The enemy tanks roared and rumbled as they struggled to maneuver within the confined, treacherous terrain of the orchard, their great bulk working against them as they became trapped within the maze of trees, craters, and tangled wire traps laid out by the resistance. Anders moved with a deadly grace, his every breath measured and calm despite the chaos around him. He darted between the frozen trunks like a shadow, his rifle spitting precise bursts of fire that targeted the weak points of the enemy machines. His eyes caught the flicker of one tank's turret seizing up, grinding to a halt, while another began to billow thick, black smoke from its engine bay, signaling its imminent failure. The enemy infantry, desperately trying to support their armored behemoths, were cut down by the sudden and fierce surge of resistance fighters who emerged from hidden trenches, ruined buildings, and behind shattered walls, turning the orchard into a deadly battleground where every tree and rock could mean life or death. Amidst the roar of gunfire, explosions, and the acrid scent of burning fuel, the battle surged back and forth like a tempest, each moment fraught with peril and the fragile hope of survival. The resistance fighters knew their ammunition was limited, their numbers stretched thin, but they fought with a ferocity born of desperation and an unyielding will to protect their homes and their people. As the relentless battle stretched into what felt like an eternity, the resistance fighters began to feel the sharp bite of exhaustion gnawing at their limbs and minds. Ammunition was running dangerously low, the steady rhythm of gunfire becoming more sporadic as men carefully rationed their precious bullets, knowing that every shot might mean the difference between life and death. The cold seeped deeper into their bones, and the acrid smoke from burning tanks stung their eyes and filled their lungs, but still, they refused to yield. Captain Wilhelm Becker, standing tall amidst the chaos and debris, scanned the battlefield with a keen eye sharpened by years of combat and leadership. His face, streaked with grime and sweat, was set in a grim mask of determination, every line speaking of the sacrifices already made and the hard choices yet to come. He knew the resistance had inflicted serious damage on the enemy, but the tide could still turn if they did not act decisively and swiftly. With a steely calm that steadied the hearts of those around him, Becker turned to Anders and Greta, the two young fighters who had proven themselves fierce and unyielding throughout the engagement. "Anders, Greta, follow me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the roar of battle like a beacon of hope and resolve. "We're going to finish this." Without hesitation, the three of them darted forward through the chaos, dodging bursts of enemy fire, weaving between the twisted wreckage of tanks and shattered trees, and leaping over frozen craters that had been torn open by explosives. The world around them was a maelstrom of noise and violence, the roar of burning steel, the sharp crack of rifles, the cries of wounded men, and the acrid smell of smoke and oil hung thick in the bitter air. Becker reached into his pack and pulled out a satchel filled with explosives, the rough fabric worn but still intact. With hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins, he lit the fuse, watching the tiny flame flicker and dance. Timing was everything. With a quick glance to ensure Anders and Greta were ready, Becker hurled the satchel beneath the last operational tank, the massive machine that still lurked among the ruined orchard. The explosion that followed was deafening, shaking the very ground beneath their feet and sending a towering plume of fire and smoke billowing skyward. Flames engulfed the steel giant in a blazing inferno, its once imposing silhouette now twisted and broken amidst the orange glow. Anders raised his rifle once more, taking careful aim at the tank's open hatch. He fired a single, precise shot that ignited spilled fuel inside the machine, turning the inferno into a raging wildfire that sealed the enemy's fate. For a moment, the battlefield fell eerily silent, the oppressive tension lifting as the last tank burned with a fierce intensity. The resistance had dealt a crippling blow, their silent echo of fire and steel had shattered the enemy's advance. When the flames finally began to flicker and die down, casting a faint orange glow against the cold gray sky, the orchard lay silent once more, an eerie, hollow silence that seemed to echo the heavy breaths of the survivors and the ghosts of those who had fallen. The acrid stench of smoke, burning oil, and scorched earth hung thick in the icy air, clinging to the trees and the broken remnants of tanks, mingling with the faint, metallic scent of spilled blood. The once beautiful orchard, which had stood for decades as a symbol of quiet life and seasonal renewal, was now scarred and twisted, its gnarled trees blackened, shattered, and bent beneath the weight of war. Among the twisted wreckage, the resistance fighters moved slowly, their bodies battered and bruised, faces pale with exhaustion and grief. Some were wounded, clutching their injuries with trembling hands, others were silent, staring blankly into the distance, their minds haunted by the memories of the fierce combat they had endured. The snow beneath their feet was stained with dark patches of blood, stark reminders of the heavy price they had paid to defend their home. The cries of the dying and the whispered prayers for the fallen mingled with the distant cawing of ravens, as if the land itself mourned the destruction. Anders Vogel and Greta stood side by side, their breaths ragged and visible in the cold air, their clothes torn and stained, but their eyes burning with a fierce, unyielding spirit. Despite the physical and emotional toll, they shared a quiet bond forged in the crucible of battle, an unspoken understanding that they had survived against impossible odds, but that the fight had changed them forever. Around them, other survivors began to regroup, their faces a mixture of relief, sorrow, and determination. Captain Wilhelm Becker approached the two young fighters, his expression weary but proud. His voice, though low and tired, carried the weight of respect and gratitude as he spoke. "You have done more than hold the line today," he said quietly, his eyes meeting theirs with deep sincerity. "You have shown that courage, cunning, and sacrifice can overcome even the darkest odds. This victory is not just for Altenwald, it is a testament to the strength of the human spirit." In the years that followed, the story of the battle at the orchard became a whispered legend throughout the surrounding villages and towns, a tale of a small, determined group who stood against the overwhelming might of steel and fire, and who refused to be broken. They called it the Silent Echo of Steel, a name that captured both the sudden, deadly strike against the enemy's machines and the lasting impact of their bravery. The scarred trees of the orchard, though battered and blackened, continued to stand tall through the seasons, as if bearing witness to the sacrifice and resilience of those who fought beneath their branches. On quiet nights, some said the wind through the trees carried a faint, haunting echo, the roar of engines silenced forever, and the whispers of courage that refused to fade. For Anders and Greta, the battle was only the beginning. The war continued, as did their fight, not just for survival, but for a future where the echoes of destruction would be replaced by the hope of peace. Their names became part of the legacy, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the light of courage can shine through and inspire generations yet to come.